So, Deirdre, how you doing? Hello and welcome again to the next in a series of Creative Cork's talks, where we shine a light on one of the biggest questions of them all. What does it mean to live well as a creative in the world today? My name is Andrew Macklin. I'm an actor and qualified career coach, working with people all across the arts and creative sectors on this very question. I am delighted to be joined today by theatre maker and set and costume designer, Deirdre Dwyer, who is speaking to me today from Ireland's oldest city, Waterford. Deirdre, how are you doing?
Very good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. And so early in the morning as well, which is always a joy, I think. For those who might not be familiar with your work, I might just, if it's all right with you, Deirdre, I might give people a very brief rundown of who you are and what you've been doing.
Sure.
Yeah. So, Deirdre, you adapt and direct theatre for young audiences and also design set and costumes for theatre, opera, dance and film. Deirdre's got a master's in theatre design from the Royal Welsh College of Music and Design and a first-class honours drama degree, theatre studies and English from University College Cork. You were awarded the first Pat Murray Bursary in 2009 and participated as a designer in Rough Magic SEEDS in Dublin. And your previous work includes set and costume design for the Everyman in Cork, Cork Opera House, Ulysses Opera Theatre, Rough Magic in Dublin, Graffiti, Junk Ensemble, and internationally you've worked at LAMDA in London, the Royal Welsh College of Music and Design in Cardiff, and the Royal Scottish Conservatoire in Glasgow. But that's not all, Deirdre. You also teach design and related theories at University College Cork, and you are currently the artist in residence at Garter Lane Arts Centre in Waterford. Have I missed anything fundamental there?
It all sounds very good when you say it like that.
What does it? What does it feel like to hear back in a breathy gulp your work to date?
Good, feels good. I stand by a lot of that. There's a lot of happy memories in there and a lot of good times. Particularly the training, all the little stints of training, the 3 trainings were very important periods for transition and growth, I think. But so no, it feels good and it feels really circular. So I'm from Waterford, have lived away from there for 20 years and returned this time last year to Waterford. So the little coda at the end of being an artist in residence in Garter Lane in Waterford feels really great, because it kind of feels like you start somewhere and then you go on a big journey and you come back somewhere. And now where's that journey going to go next is going to be interesting. We'll find out. And
was there any plan to that nice cycle?
No, like I always loved Waterford, like genuinely felt accepted into the arts from 15 when I first started Waterford Youth Arts, and it was Waterford Youth Drama then, suddenly found tribe and a gang, and then that led me to integrate with Spree, and I worked with Spree for a number of years and had interactions with Little Red Kettle and was aware of Red Kettle's work, of course, so always felt like plugged in. And then would have happily stayed, I think, but there wasn't a drama degree in Waterford and was really keen to do that, so that sent me off. And I often was like, I could just move home, but that the journey had no plan. And kind of up to about 5 years ago, I didn't think I would ever move home. There was no impetus. And then kind of Waterford just became more and more appealing, both like financially and I guess you kind of get to a settling stage and going, okay, where do I want to be? And what kind of a life do I want to have? And Waterford seemed to be able to offer that in a really neat and kind of attractive package. So my fondness for it then meant, oh, that's great, I get to go back. And it has really been a joyful return. I haven't missed the other cities that I've lived in. I've been really felt grounded and happy to be home, and it feels like home.
God, it's fantastic. I mean, hearing you talk about sort of Waterford Youth Arts and Spree, there's this sort of feeling of like it felt a little like you're being whipped up in some sort of breeze that was just taking you. So yeah, I mean, what was that like to think now that you set and costume designer? I mean, looking at that as a title and trying to trace it back to where you began with that, like, when you're 12 or 13, those words probably aren't in your head, maybe. So how did you how did you begin to lock onto that as an idea and that as a job and that as a way forward?
Well, it's definitely through Waterford Youth Arts. Like, so, you know, so I was having conversations with friends about how lucky I was that I stumbled into the thing that I liked really early, which has given me great direction and forward motion.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I was kind of 15, 14 and interested in art, interested in fashion, so interested in clothing, and interested in drama. So kind of costume was the door opener. And then the opportunities that were there in Waterford Youth Arts, because it has been and was my experience that it's an organization that says, you're interested in that thing, there's a person doing that thing, go and work with them. So like Michelle Clancy was doing the costumes for Mary the Goddess, a show about, you know, a Nigerian village and their experiences with Mary, the goddess of the river. And I was 15, and that was the younger group, and Michelle was making all of these costumes for these kind of skinny 9 to 12-year-old white children in Waterford, and these African costumes with beading, and there was an opportunity to learn from her, and I went and spent my Wednesdays after school and Sundays, I think, in the back room in Waterford Youth Arts, glowing beads onto hats. And at the end of the process, we got to see the brilliant production, and Michelle gave me a card of thanks and a £50 note in it. Must have been pounds. And so, like, you know, that was a portion of her fee, but she had felt that the help I'd given was worthwhile. And I went, people make money doing this? Like, this thing that I'm just doing is a job? You know, I hadn't thought about that. And that was it, really. That was the gateway drug. And then working with Spree and using a sewing machine for the first time with Claire Horgan when I was there on my work experience stint from transition year, and making an eye patch. That was my thing, and they're not easy to sew when you've never used an industrial sewing machine before, but so that was the drug. And then getting paid. So after a few years in Spree, they were in a position to give me a very small fee to do a small amount of work, and to do a section of the parade, like make the costumes under the design of the between Claire and the creators of the parade. So then it was like, that's my job now, my summer job. So I didn't have to get a job in a restaurant. Like, I did work in our own family restaurant of the weekend, but which was really lucky. Like, it was really lucky that all fitted in, and then that sent me down this path.
Oh, wow. I mean, it's something that's come up before in some people that I've talked to, the idea that there's a thing that they're doing that they really like, and then suddenly they're in a position of getting money for it, and something clicks, and they kind of go, oh, I see. This is a sort of a job that can be done in a way. With a lot of people, in the arts at that stage, there can be quite a lot of, that's a bit of a transition stage, I think, when you discover something, especially early on, that you really like, that you're really passionate about, that might not be one of the social norms knocking around your fields. And quite often there can be a bit of resistance to that. Or it's the first time that people are challenged on something that they kind of want to do. Was there any of that for you? Was it a universal sort of, yeah, you should go and do this thing? Or were there voices of dissent somewhere around you that might have, suggested otherwise?
My parental support has always been like, not unconditionally do that thing that doesn't look like it'll make a lot of money, but you seem to be doing okay at that, and you seem to be making a little bit of money, so you love it. So, you know, there was never any dissent from that. If it had turned into something that wasn't working, I think there might have been more questions, but they were going, you know, we hadn't even thought of that, and not, you're off doing it, grand, you work away, you know. So that, and then they could see my passion and interest, and they would be an arts loving family. They would have been the people who brought me to see some of those formative theatre memories that were available in Waterford. So when Machnas brought down Diamonds in the Soil, or there was the Tua de Dan, and I'm not sure what the name of the show was it Cuchulainn, or so that was on in the De La Salle Sports Centre, and Mum and Dad brought me there. So when I was kind of like maybe 9ish, if I've got the times right, and seeing, you know, half-naked grown men dressed in Cuchulainn gear, having a really physical play. And Mum took me to see Fitzbarron's Romeo and Juliet when it was there, where the Eco Park is now, when they set up their big tent. So all of those really formative theatrical moments, like they would have been encouraged, like not at all intentionally, just this is the thing that's happening, let's go and see it. Mm-hmm. So I think that there was an openness to theatre in our household that maybe wouldn't have been there in other households. And in school, like I'm a talker, and I found school kind of I found the learning interesting always. So I think there was teachers who kind of went, maybe law might be a thing you'd be interested in. Kind of, I have always had an interest in social justice, so kind of law maybe was a thing. I'm interested in the environment and nature and stuff, so kind of maybe biologies, marine biologies. And the only thing that parental pressure ever kind of came in on was my father really encouraged me to do a science subject for my leaving cert. So I ended up doing chemistry because I had wanted to pick art and history and music. And he said, just in case you change your mind and want to go down any of those sciencey roads, just pick a science subject too. And he didn't lay down the law very firmly, but he was like, you could just keep your options open. So I did do chemistry, which was tough, not a dream, but that did keep those options open. But really theatre was the thing. Like theatre was the thing always. So it kind of was like, just the school wouldn't have known how to prepare you for that, or like the career guidance teacher hadn't had many who were going off who didn't want to be actors. I was very clear I didn't want to be an actor. So that's a more clear path, but I just wanted to work in theatre, particularly in the design areas. So they were like, well, I don't know, and so I went off and did the research and went, these are the courses, and the courses that allow you to look at art history as well, maybe, or English as well. So that was the way of it.
So it sounds like then there was kind of two things that stick out to me listening that were key. And one was that you could see arts, A, that there was arts in plays happening, and that B, that you were brought to them. So the potential was sort of opened to, oh, this is a thing that happens in the world. But also then it seemed like you had preempted any concerns that your parents might have had by doing the thing. You were spending your summers and your time working in it before they noticed that you were doing it. Is that sort of...
Yeah. Like, and they wouldn't have had any problem with it, but like, that led to assuage any fears, mm-hmm. and any, the financial imperative of like, get your summer job. Oh, I already have one and I did it last year, and so that was all kind of taken care of.
And so then when you're sort of reaching kind of 17, 18, you mentioned about taking on that science subject and the potential of law and other things, and there's a lot in the pot at that age. And you're coming up to making those decisions around what you might want to go and train at, or what you want to go and do. What was your sort of image of what your career might be at that stage? When you're thinking about being a set and costume designer at that point, what did you see the potential future as?
It was film, I think, and which is really interesting because that's the most visible, and it's the one that you can see people succeeding at. So you can see Colleen Atwood accepting her Oscar for Best Costume Design in Film. So you can see that that's a thing. Like, theatre awards aren't even now, like, they're not televised or whatever. So how do you know what's going on unless you read the paper or I don't know, whatever. So certainly, and film and TV is there in your life so much more presently than theatre. So that was, I think, what I thought would be to be really good at. I'd have to, not have to, but that would be, you'd succeed at being a film costume designer was I think, because I remember writing in my Leaving Cert art essay, about Colleen Atwood's designs and going, okay, so, so even then I was tailoring the things to the stuff that I was interested in. So I thought that film would be where you succeed. And even now, like, certainly I think film costume designers get paid a lot more than theatre costume designers. I know they do, even though they work incredibly hard. And I think that costume in film and TV is just such an incredible department, and they work so hard. They work the longest hours. They're in before all the actors. They're doing all the washing after the day on set, and you only notice it if it's wrong. As a viewer, if somebody's wearing the wrong thing, you go, that's the wrong thing. But all of the times they've been wearing the exact right thing for their character, you don't even see it. you just go, yes, they're just wearing clothes. No, that's choices people made to make you feel that these are real characters. And it's when they're wearing the wrong handbag and you go, she would never wear that. And I think also that's me looking out for things. But apart from that, costume design is practically invisible on film and television, unless it's a costume drama where that is part of the sell. But apart from that, you know, I've been watching The Wire and looking at the shirt Idris Elba, like the jumper, it's a red jumper that he was wearing in a scene with really slouchy pants, and going, so perfect, you know, and invisible, because it just looks like clothes that character put on that morning. So that was, I think I thought that was success. But still always interested in theatre, and was thinking about theatre and how do you make, like I still at 18 was going, how do you be a theatre maker and have a job? Like how does that work? Like, and the funding structures were so opaque, like I couldn't figure out how any of this worked. And we were never talked to about it. And that's definitely something you have to figure out as you go along, which is like really hard and not taught and not talked about, I think. So yeah.
It's fascinating to hear you talk about excellence as a costume designer is invisible.
Yeah.
You know,
and in terms of reviews, if the design is mentioned in a you know 140 word review that gets into the paper, it's rare because all of the other things need to get mentioned. So if you get your name in the paper, in the review, that's kind of good enough. Like if they go, design was also by Deirdre Dwyer, you know, like they won't give a positive or negative necessarily. So the design is generally only critiqued if it is exceptional, which means that it was shining out above everything else in the production, or subpar. If it's just good enough and it fits within the world perfectly, then it's rarely mentioned.
So you were still at that point unsure of how you actually be an artist in the world. You knew what you wanted to do, but you didn't quite know that unless you're winning an Oscar for costume in films, how it's going to pay for anything. So how did you go about the next step to training? How did that work out?
So I was like all gung-ho going to Trinity. That was it. That was the course that I thought was going to be the one for me, and Dublin and cool and, you know, everything brilliant about going away. And then I went to the interview system for Trinity, and while I got on well, it felt incredibly competitive. Their structure of interviewing is, or was, I don't know if they still do this at all, but you as a student applying, having your interview about the Drama and Theatre Studies degree, sat with two other people in your interview panel. So you listened to somebody being interviewed before you, and then you listened to another person being interviewed, and then two people were listening to you being interviewed. So that structure was very competitive. And then I felt less than kindness to somebody who was before me, because they weren't really versed in theatre. They'd done some musicals in their local town, and then the questions kind of didn't feel kind to me. And I felt like that's not a good environment to be going into, where they're not going to be kind to their prospective to their interviewees, their prospective students. Now, while I had because I'm such a nerd anyway, I was like, yeah, I know everything, I'm a good child. So like that was part of it. But then I had my interview process in UCC in Cork, and it was workshop, like the Trinity did a workshop too, but it was so much more encouraging and positive. And it was the first year they'd had a drama degree in UCC, and I hadn't considered going to Cork at all, but went down and just found the atmosphere so much nicer. So I flipped my choices on my CAO form, and I have never regretted. You know, I kind of regret the lack of prestige and the lack of a course with lineage in some way, because we were the first year, but like had just the best experience in my college years in UCC. So it was like no regrets.
It's really interesting to hear you say how that sort of filter that you had going to Trinity around, well, how are they treating people, especially people who are new coming to this, and that being such a deciding factor to go, oh, actually the experience I've gotten elsewhere in Cork is so significantly different. Was that sort of filter, was that something that was just instilled in you, that you naturally had, and is it something that you've kept?
I think it's the social justice thing. So like, you know, our schooling focused, there's an after school club on social justice, which was like a phrase that I'd never heard, you know, like, so it was the peace and justice group in our school. And while having, I think, you know, being brought up by by parents who would have focused on like fairness and kindness and like treating other people like you want to be treated. And, you know, as parents, they were never dictatorial, but they had firm rules. So, you know, it was, we were all a kind of a team together, probably. And then, but they were the leaders, you know, so it wasn't that we had an equal say as our parents, you know, but they wouldn't be, you know, they would give you a reason for why you couldn't do a thing, you know, so that seems all structurally, like that would be my belief system still. Working with anybody, like working with children, you know, they're all human beings who are sensible and will respond to reason. So that's one part of that, I think. And then probably the Peace and Justice group, just like focusing on ideas of social injustice and having an awareness of that, and then like spending your Thursday lunchtime doing a project about things when things are just wrong, like when things are morally wrong, that I felt that was morally wrong in that interview, to ridicule a 17, 18-year-old who was my peer, who, like, why would you bother doing that to someone? So I was like, no, don't want to do that.
But I can reflect your experience, but not your awareness. going to drama schools in London and auditioning, and yeah, the experience is sort of what I now recognize as sort of clear status playing. But then looking back now, going, well, why are you playing status games with a 17-year-old? I don't fully get it. But it seems to be more in places that have that prestige, and maybe there's an element of that. But really interesting that you had, I guess, the awareness about just what's wrong, to be able to go, my experience here, I assume, might not be great. This is not the best introduction. So you went to Cork. I wonder, from your experience there of the training, how did it change, or did it change how you saw your role as a set and costume designer?
The course didn't cater for having set and costume. Now, the course was brand new, so it didn't cater for anything particularly. It was, you know, it knew what it was going to do, but it didn't know how it was going to have to respond to its students. So there was 15 of us in the first year, and you know, I had clearly stated from the outset that I was interested in design, but you know, the first 2 years you don't get any specifications. You're doing the same as everybody else, and that's brilliant. And also that in tandem with the text and context, so like learning about the history, like that was a thing. Like I knew I loved drama, but I didn't know plays. I hadn't read many plays ever, like, you know, occasional workshops where you're given a soliloquy in Waterford Youth Arts, but I'd never read like plays. So being forced to read, you know, tons of plays in your first year, and then also doing that in tandem with English, so reading in that environment as well, and then being just part of a cohort, like that's what it taught us. It made us a cohort who were willing to do the weird yoga moves on, you know, Wednesday mornings, and then willing to do your flocking exercises where you're physical, but also sitting down together and interrogating, you know, Trifles by Susan Glaspell. That was like one of the only texts written by women that we studied, you know. So it was a really great grounding, made us a cohort and a group. And then there was the final year productions, or the second year productions actually, when everybody played a part. So there was actors, there was people assisting the director, and then they said, you're interested in doing this, do you want to do costumes? And it was a Victorian piece, so I got to make out of bed sheets in my student accommodation Victorian like gowns for 10, well, Victorian costumes for 10 actors. And that was a really great like, you know, putting you on the spot and going, this is what you're interested in doing, just do it. And it really succeeding and being graded on that. So that was the first time that I was in a position to contribute that skill set to the academic sphere, I suppose. And it was great. And like, they're not perfect. The photographs there's very few photographs. You know, we weren't documenting our work in the way that we would be now with digital cameras all the time. I've got about 7 photos, 4 of which were taken by one of the girls on film, you know, and they have the little date stamp on it, you know, just because we were taking photos for fun. Yeah. So that's a really different thing as well. But so that was the moment of crystallization, but all of the extra experiences that I had to go through that I wouldn't have necessarily wanted to, because I knew I didn't want to be an actor, but all of that experience of being an actor on stage in those contexts give you a better sense of what it is like to be an actor wearing clothes, or what it is like to be looked at, and it gave you a better sensitivity to all of the other roles in the team of theatre making. So I think it gave me more than I asked for, more than I knew I wanted, but still was allowing me to plough that little path of particularly costume design at that point.
I mean, it sounds great. To be involved in something that was forming as you joined. It was the first year of it, but the fact that it was so eclectic and covered everything, like you said, because I think, I mean, I went to a very specific sort of acting place, but you would just have, and they actively kept all the departments very separate. So your experience as an actor is quite limited to, well, theatre is just what I do when I come on and when I leave. And so to have that full mix, to hear you say how that influenced your work. But you went on to Wales to do a master's, am I right, after that? So what did you feel was needed at the end of that course?
I did the SEEDS program first. So I finished college, and then I did 2 years of working and doing lots of production stuff, lots of assisting stuff, kind of whatever I could, and then admin, lots of theatre admin. So that was where the money was. So Cork Midsummer Festival, so I finished, and Cork Midsummer Festival were looking for a general manager. I had done a stint of admin in my work experience in Cork, or from UCC, so I had worked with Barabbas and been trained up a little bit in theatre admin, because I had done my stint in Barabbas. They were able to offer me 2 weeks in the rehearsal room and 2 weeks in the office. And so, the Trina Niguiver, who was the Barabbas general manager at the time, went, "Oh, you're okay at this and you can do that. So will you come back and work for us in the summer when we're doing our project next year?" So I'd done a little bit of that. And then this job came up in the midsummer and I applied for it. And the artistic director rang me afterwards and went, "Of course I can't offer you this job because you have no experience, and you would be the financial controller for the organization. But the person who we are going to offer it to isn't able to take it up for 3 months. So would you come in as an admin assistant and take over those bits until she's in a position to come in full time?" So I was like, great, that's another gig, like that's money. So I did 3 months work there. And again, this is all about so I know how important it is to have a structure in a company, to have a photocopier, to have a computer that you can use, to have access to, genuinely access to a photocopier is one of those kind of weird things that as a freelance artist, you're like, oh, wouldn't it be great to just print stuff off? So that was happening, and then this opportunity came up with Rough Magic SEEDS, which was, I'd been aware Tom Creed, who had been just finished college when I was going into college, and so he was still hanging around the granary, which had been such a beautiful hub of creation and artistic expression. So Tom and Linda Radley and Thomas Conway a little bit, these names who are now names in theatre, Una Carney, they were all part of the cohort that was just above us, who hadn't had a degree. So they had all studied arts and Ray Scannell was another one of that cohort. They had all made the granary their home. And so they were all working. Tom had done SEEDS, and he had hired me to do the costume and set design for his final year production, because the SEEDS program started as a writer support. Then it included directors, and then this year was the first year they were opening it up to kind of make a mini company. So they offered it to 3 writers and 5 artists. So a producer, who was Keane O'Brien, who runs Project now, Sarah Jane Shields, who's a lighting designer, and Sophie Mockley, who's the director of, the name of the company in Shropshire, I can't remember. I'm sorry, Sophie. Connor Hanratty, who's the director and who's just published his book on Japanese Ninagawa, and myself. So there was 5 of us, and we were all babies. Cian and Connor and Sarah Jane and Sophie all went to Trinity and had been through that and were at various different ages in it. So I went to do that, and that's where I realized I needed to get more training, because that was a brilliant experience in terms of connections, working on professional theatre shows. So assisting designers, assisting Kathy Strachan and assisting Alan Farquharson, and observing their processes and going, oh. And this was the first time I'd said out loud that I wanted to do set as well. And that's kind of a power grab, basically, as well. For me, it's costume design is I think, vital, and I feel incredibly passionate about it. But the costume designer is not the power, you know. And in the power dynamic, it's the director and the set designer who make the world, and everybody else fits into it. So in the backstage hierarchy, I saw that the set designer had way more power than me, and went, I like design, maybe I want to get more power. So it was like a power grab, really. So applied to do that, and was lucky to be accepted on the SEEDS program, which showed me I needed to learn loads about set design, and I needed to learn how to communicate the idea in my head to somebody else, so I don't have to do all the work. So that was a big learning curve, because I had been doing everything so far. So anytime I designed anything, I'd been doing the making, and so I never had to explain what I meant to anybody else, because it was coming out. And the model making process for our show. So we did Caligula and Pilgrims of the Night, were the two plays. So Sophie directed one and Connor directed the other. And my model making process was me with like matchsticks and back of cardboard boxes. And, you know, I had seen people making models, and had been to London for 4 weeks and Greece working with the amazing Alison Chitty, which was like, oh, people do this. I got to be working in the Herodian Atticus. So all these experiences that we were paid to have. But my model making process was and my technical drawing that I sent to the builder, like, he understood it all because it made like as much sense as it could, but he's like, this is not standard, you know, the way you have done this. I made up a scale because I didn't have a scale ruler. So just divided everything down into 33 1/3 ultimately, as opposed to the standards, which I needed to learn. So that was what sent me off to Wales, to learn how to do those things in a really formal way. So I think that was important for me to learn those things, to get the language, to create a model that you could give to a builder that they would then be able to build from. And that makes you have to make all those decisions in small, which is a lot cheaper to make those decisions than in really big and wasting materials. So it's about forcing you as a designer to make those decisions early. So that had been a practice missing from my practice, you know, because I made those decisions on the hoof and did a little sketch, and then in the building of it, it came out. So it was about discipline, because I knew I would never get to be better and work on bigger productions if I couldn't do that. So I needed to learn how to do that.
So that was it sounds like a key point, the idea that in order to grow at this, I need to get the knowledge and the structure and the skills to be able to do bigger projects. But I'm really interested in that little, well, there's two things that come out to me from what you've just been talking in that period from leaving Cork. It sounds wonderful, this experience of connection that you've met with all this, like you say, this cohort of people that are now sort of proliferating the heights of theatre throughout the land in Ireland and beyond. But what were, during that time that you had in Dublin after Cork, what were the obstacles? It sounds lovely. It sounds like you're jumping from job to job, and it's satisfying and creative in each one. But I'd imagine there's a sense of, well, where am I going? What am I doing? What's happening? What were the obstacles for you at the time?
Well, you were broke, completely broke. So I was getting paid things, but completely broke. And staying in the box room in my cousin's house in Rathfarnham. So occasionally walking into town from Rathfarnham, it's about an hour and 10 minutes maybe. Just because, you know, you were so broke. Like, and but like, you know, so I was lucky that I had a cousin who had a box room that I could rent off them. You know, I was really lucky with that structure, because if I had to have just freelance rented, I don't know how that would have gone. And then there was there was loads of travel, because I still had my life in Cork, you know, so it was up and down on the bus, or not, you know, not going up and down when you really wanted to be in. So spending the weekend on your own in a box room in Rathfarnham, which is fine, you know, grand. So, like, I don't remember any hardship in that now that I'm thinking about it, but there must have been. So those would have been the obstacles. And like, so I think in terms of thinking about networks, the thing that has been really useful for me was the structure. So I had the Cork structure, and then I was put into this structure in like the Barabbas then company structure I learned and was working in, and then I was put into this gang, like you got put into a gang with the SEEDS. So I immediately had a purpose and connection and people to talk to who were going through the same thing. So the structures that have been given to me through formal education and even this informal kind of apprenticeship program have been really useful, that I haven't had to organically create those. They've been part of the infrastructure of whatever I've been doing. And that would go on to Wales again and give me another network of designers. So those things, the formal learning environment, or informal in the Seeds way, gave me a cohort in every time. So that's like a leg up, you know, like you're immediately on a better footing, to use some foot analogies.
I mean, that's really fascinating, the idea, because quite often it's a case for people of, well, if I get into an institution, I'll be legitimized and that will help things grow. And there's something in that. But also it sounds like what you're saying is that you can find those structures. They don't have to be necessarily directly from training. You can be put in them as a part of certain projects, but that feels like a kind of a platform that you then have connection-wise that seems to be really, or was really helpful for you at that point.
Yeah, and has remained to be like again, you know, from Waterford Youth Arts to Spree, then into UCC, like it's a gang of people who are like-minded with you, who you like as humans, and whose art you think is interesting. So landing in those places is really lucky, and it gives such foundation and support and nurturance to your emerging self, because other people are emerging as well. And certainly that was the process of emerging, I think, as an artist.
Well, we'll get on to artist in a bit, but I was really interested, before we move on to hear about sort of professionally and what Wales did and in that context, but we were talking earlier around the idea of going, well, costume design is vital, but there was a sense of the power might reside in set design. What was the benefit? Yeah, what benefit did you see in that power step up? What is the benefit of that to you?
I mean, I think I'm probably going through that at the moment, in that I'm now transitioning to directing as well. And so kind of, it's power, like it's the control. I'm kind of going, so like, I guess there's the negatives of, you know, all of the pressure is on your shoulders, or, you know, your name is the one on the line, and people will be critiquing you in a broad sense for this piece. So that's the negative about it. But then the positive is that you get to be the captain of the ship, and you know, and kind of very much, I use that analogy in theatre making all the time. Like I think, having been in many collaborative processes, I still think there one central figurehead through whom all ideas are filtered is really useful. And so I do think that hierarchy is good in this context, though, you know, kind of in social ways, I'm not sure hierarchy is always the best, but I can see it's really practical, and it's really effective. So I wanted more say. I have lots of ideas and opinions, and I wanted more say on what world would be made for each theatre play. So that was why I was interested in getting more power and more control and more time at the table, more speaking time at the table. And that's what, and I think it has given me that you become the co-creator of the world with the director, and then you just have to provide them with the platform and the environment, and then when I'm doing costumes as well, you get all of that vital detail, so you get to do big picture, really minute detail, and you're ultimately, it's somebody else's baby that they then birth. You've just given all of this scaffolding to it. So it's about power and control. Classics.
Ships, birthing, and scaffolding. But when you say power and control, though, it sounds very different to what someone might imagine when someone says, "Oh, look, I wanted more power, so I went for this position," and that it would be that dominating power and control. I want to tell others what to do. But it sounds slightly different, or a lot different, in that it gave you more time at the table to be able to speak about what you wanted to do and to be able to work on a bigger picture. Yeah. So it sounds like that power was less, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what's interesting is it sounds like it's not about a domineering quality, or even a kind of financial, I want to be making masses of money. It seems like it was very much around, I just want to have more expression and practice doing, is that sort of...
Yes, and it's funny, like the fact that you're talking about money there, I hadn't, that I mean, of course you get more money as well, but I had forgotten that could have been part of my motivating factors. I mean, when the Waking the Feminist movement spoke, the wonderful costume designer, whose name has just jumped out of my brain, spoke, Joan O'Clery, the wonderful costume designer Joan O'Clery, spoke in her, whatever you had, 3.5 minutes or 3 minutes, about the fact that costume designers are paid less than set designers. That is the standard. So like if a costume designer is getting a fee, that is the set designer will probably get a fee of 20% higher at least. And then if you become the set and costume designer, you don't get those two fees combined. You get, kind of, it's a bit bigger than the set designer fee, but it's not representative of those two fees being combined, at least not in my experience. Maybe that's not the best way of doing it. But she was talking about the fact that costume designers on average get at least 20% less than their set designer cohort, and that could be a feminist issue. And I'd never thought about that before. It had not been, but because costume design is predominantly female, not all, of course, not all anything, but it's a more widely female field, and set design is generally a more widely male field. Could that have something to do with it? Because they're certainly both putting in the same amount of hours. Mm-hmm. And from a set designer perspective, all your work happens before rehearsal in theory, or depending on the project, can happen weeks. You'll have, weeks and weeks of meetings. It won't be constant. And then you'll have the model showing, and then the building. You pass that over to the builder, so you'll be supervising the building. But with costume design, it's all of that thinking and planning that happens in advance, the very same as set. And then you're supervising the making for the 4 weeks of rehearsal or the 6 weeks of rehearsal. And it's full time, you doing the thing, in my experience. So from my experience of doing it, costume designers do many more. I don't know if that, I can't say that that's definitely true, but it seems that they do many more contact hours on the job, and yes, they're going to get paid 20% less. That hadn't occurred to me as a possible feminist issue. I don't know that it is a feminist issue. It's certainly a structural, hierarchical one. Her argument, which I think she made really clear, was that women were doing that job. That was the job that women were doing, even in, kind of the 1800s in theatres, because that was their skill set, and men were doing the big picture job with the paintbrush and going, and so maybe that's why that's residually there in contracts now, even today, that in general the costume designer fee is less than the set designer fee, because I can't think of another really good reason for that.
And yeah, I mean, we've stumbled into, I think, usefully a sort of gendered idea, which I think is really important to maybe just dig into a little bit, because my experience will clearly be very different from yours, I imagine, in theatre as a woman. I mean, what are the extra barriers that you have noticed as a woman in theatre? I'm presuming there are them. It's
really interesting to be in this position as a set and costume designer, where you're kind of in between those worlds, and also the set and costume designer role is in between the technical, which is generally male dominated, so the crew, and then also the lighting and the lighting world, because if you're making a set, that's your closest collaboration is actually with the lighting designer, because they're going to make it look beautiful in the end, in a way that you really need, and you need to be on the same page imaginatively and creatively with the director, obviously. So being in this kind of in-between place, and then as a costume designer, you've spent so much time working with the actor, and it can be a really maternal role of caring for them and making sure they feel comfortable in the thing that you've created, and making sure they're supported in stepping on stage and feeling like they're the character then. So, it's this weird, you have to have both brains on. And I notice it when again, like most things, when things are going brilliantly and everybody's treating everybody like a normal human, you don't notice that at all. Gender becomes completely irrelevant. Really, when there's no question about anything, it's just work, and they're just human people who you're working with. And then it becomes noticeable when you are not treated in that way. So if you're the only woman at a table, and you're not even though you're the designer, you're not given as much credence as you would be, you know, their context. You suddenly kind of notice that. Now that could be just youth. I have often put some of those things down to youth. I'm no longer the youngest at the table, but for a while I was young. And so you kind of go, okay, those older men are thinking just she's young and inexperienced, rather than she's a woman and young and inexperienced. I hadn't necessarily put those things together, or maybe they weren't together. You know, I couldn't tell what people's agendas are. So that would be one of the experiences. And then there have been concrete examples of when a company has come back to me and said, we have to raise your fee because you as a costume designer were going to be paid less than the lighting designer, for example, but because they argued harder for their fee. So that person happened to be a male, and you accepted our first offer and they wouldn't, and so they're getting another $200. So we feel it's only fair to bring you up as well, and we wanted to explain why. So that was a company being incredibly open about that experience. Now, I can't tell you that that's a gendered, I can't prove that that's a gendered experience, but I don't know how many times that's happened when the company didn't write that situation. They didn't just go, great, we've saved $200 on this person, you know, like, and it wouldn't be Machiavellian in that way. I don't think it would just be like the budget's really tight, but that company chose to be open and honest with me about the reasons for why they were suddenly giving me a little bit extra. And so that's an experience that has really happened, and, you know, I feel was a gendered thing, but that's not, you know, I should have been fighting harder for my money then, or the world should just work where everybody gets paid the same and you shouldn't have to fight for anything, you know. So those are the two options. So yeah, being like, it hasn't defined my career in any way, shape or form, my gender, I don't think, or my experiences of gender within it, but I suspect that there is still a patriarchal hierarchical system in place that probably doesn't benefit women as much as it might benefit men, would be my guess, but I would need more data to prove that.
I mean, it sounds like with that patriarchal structure that I think it's fair to say that we're in, it sounds like you've gone from a place of sort of naive, in the best possible way, just not knowing that that's the thing that's in place, to a place of sort of knowing that potentially that is the way in which sometimes you will be looked at and decisions might be made differently for you. With that knowing now, has it changed your interactions? How do you use that knowledge now in your work? Or do you, when you're interacting with other people, or maybe if it's about money, is there some element that you do differently with that knowing?
I think that I have overcorrected in ways. So I was, the last show that I directed and was at the helm of was Miss Happiness and Miss Flower, a show for children, and there was only one man on our team at one stage. Then we got a second man to be an ASM. So there was a team of, say, 8 people or 10 people, and two were men and 8 were women. And I found that happened because the performers were both women, and that is how I have probably overcorrected. Like, I'm more interested in the shows that I am leading in telling the story from a female perspective. So both of the shows for young audiences that I have chosen have been with female lead, and you know, with girl, generally it's a girl lead, so it's a young woman lead. And I think that is definitely something that I'm really interested in telling as a story, partly because of those classic conversations that everybody has heard happening about the fact that books with boys as the hero will be read by both genders equally, but books with girls as the hero will only be read by girls and a small portion of boys. So like, the boy world is for everybody, but the girl world is just for girls. So I would be interested in telling those stories out loud and hopefully having a mixed gender audience of children, you know. But so I think I need to be conscious. Also, the world of children for theatre for children is very female dominated, and it is important not to let that be ghettoized, and to encourage men to be in that role as well, because it is such a joyful rewarding role. There are hundreds of men working in that area, so it's not like, but just to make sure that door doesn't get closed, that I don't close that door and go, this is a women's zone, and not invite and include men into that zone as well.
Hearing you talk about that, it seems like there's a real, that social justice class and Waterford Youth Arts have stayed as threads throughout what you have done continually, to the benefit, I'd say, not just of yourself, but of like society from the perspective of those who are coming to see the shows that you're making, and even within theatre as well, that's the stories you're choosing to work with. Just to jump really briefly back to your time in Wales before, because you've worked in lots of different places and you've lived, I hope I don't get this wrong, you've lived in Dublin, Cork, Waterford, you've also worked in Glasgow, you spent some time in Wales, and I know you've spent some time in London because you stayed in my flat there, so I'm well aware of your time there. But you'd mentioned about needing to get more skills to get that big picture work. And that I imagine that's sort of what led you towards training at Royal, in Wales. Was there a cultural shift in any way to the way in which things were being done there in that training to your previous experience?
Yeah, I think that the British, and so I say British, I probably shouldn't, the UK system. So, because actually I've worked in London and I've worked in Scotland and Wales, and they're distinct flavours. And I've worked up in Belfast. Didn't mention Belfast. And I've spent time in Belfast as a result of that. The UK system is better structured. It's older. The Irish theatre system is much more self-taught, people just doing it, which is fantastic, and I wouldn't question that. But so I learned about much more the hierarchical structures when I went to Wales, and also like so kind of the things that are akin to military, structures and cooking, chef structures, which is all similar. So I learned about that, like even knowing the difference between a DSM and ASM, and there's another one. There's the stage manager, the stage director, and the ASM. Those roles. You'd only had a stage manager in my experience in Irish theatre up to that point. I was like, oh, what are these roles? And they're distinct roles, and okay, I better learn about those. So in that way, it was about the formality of it that it certainly gave me, and also that it was a much bigger industry. Like there was an industry there. I don't know that we have a theatre industry obviously here, but it is smaller, and it is less commercial. So it was observing that commercial theatre model as a really important part of the scene, where I don't know that we really have that here. Mm-hmm. Like reps touring, the fact that there's a theatre, like a kind of a 600-seater theatre in most generous sized towns in the UK, which will receive various productions of Le Cage aux Folles, or that structure is there. And so in terms of work, there's lots of work for costume assistants to work. There's lots of assistant designer roles that actually are paid, and those people then make models. Those things don't really exist in Ireland as a structural thing. So that was definitely one of the things that opened my eyes to a more formal structure. And I've never really wanted to go away. I've always been very happy, but that's where the work was. So, this time of COVID is really, so we're I don't know, somebody has said about 110 days into it or something. And that's the longest I've ever stayed in my bed, in 15 years. That's the longest consecutive period. And that is just gorgeous. That is to be in and watching the garden grow, and be here and not going, okay, Thursday, driving to Limerick and spending the night in Limerick on Thursday. Then I will go from Limerick to Cork, spend 2 nights there doing a tech or whatever, and then come back for 3 nights and then go to Dublin for a meeting. Now we will all be Zooming meetings. There'll be none of this traveling 2.5 hours for a production meeting, spending an hour there and driving 2.5 hours back. I think those days are gone now. So that is certainly something that I learned, was you kind of have to, and also you get more respect if you go away and come back. If people see you've worked in LAMDA in London, even though I was doing really hard work, 3-show rep but also getting experience of doing a 3-show rep, for a number of years. Mm-hmm. That was a skill set that I now have that I didn't have before. It's made me all of those learning experiences. So I think that answered your question. I kind of roundabouted it.
Very much so. God, I'm interested though. I mean, you mentioned about the traveling around. That I think I'm also grateful that there'll be a little less of that, maybe to a degree, because it's quite time consuming. But I mean, how many years were you based in Dublin?
like I've kind of free, but I wasn't always there. Like I still wasn't living there. And I have lived in like so many, part of the joy of the traveling around is I get different senses. So I lived in Rathfarnham, I lived in Stoneybatter, I've lived in South County Dublin. Now I have my very kind sister will let me come up and stay. So I regularly spend about 3 months in Dublin every year, but so kind of 1 in January when I'm working on a particular project that's recurring, and another 2 at festival time kind of thing. So that's kind of 3 months of the year where I am mostly based in Dublin. And then I will travel around wherever there's a project. So kind of Galway, or the things that were happening that are now not happening were Galway and Dublin and Cork. So now I'm here, like in Waterford.
Yeah, and with that, how is, because you mentioned at the beginning, this sort of movement, this full circle movement back to Waterford, and it's something that I'm hearing a lot of artists, especially living in Dublin, doing, which is fleeing the rental system that might well be crippling their potential in many areas, and finding areas in the West or anywhere that they can do their work in a place that is allows for what sounds like a much more balanced all-around way of doing things. So what was your aim in going to Waterford? What were you trying to create for yourself that wasn't there before?
Like a lot of the imperatives were financial. So even in Cork, the rental market was really hard, and we had been living in a lovely house for 10 years, and so when you think about how much rent you paid in 10 years in one place, you kind of go whoa. But we wanted to move to another house, and the options were go somewhere less nice, smaller for more money, or move in with people. And like we were done with that. So really the Waterford's better rental market was a really big carrot. And full disclosure, my parents had a house here that was rented out that we were able to move into. So like, again, the privilege, I completely am aware that those opportunities, and my partner has gotten a real job. Like, so those financial things are, you know, we're still paying rent, and we're but those financial things are real, and not everybody has those supports of a partner who's got a real job, or you know, the capacity to move. Now we would still, I think, have moved to Waterford and rented a house, and would be looking, there's the possibility of us buying a house in the next 5 years. Like, you know, we have no money now, but there's the possibility of that here, which I don't think was in Waterford or in Cork, and was certainly not in Dublin. The thing, I had a crystal moment once on a train going from Dublin to Cork, and looking out the window and just seeing things out the window and going, why? So Dublin is prestige to me, and Dublin is where people take you seriously. Like you are, like, I will be very much more viewed as a community artist in Waterford than a true theatre artist. And that's partly because of the decisions I've made about who I want to access my art. Like I'm really interested in getting children to access my art, because art was such an important part of my brain growing up because of these experiences. So that has ghettoized me into this kind of community artist position, and with a special niche interest in children, you know, which isn't the prestige areas of theatre at all. You know, it's not going to get me an Irish Times Theatre Award, like if that's the pinnacle of making work in Ireland. And so Dublin is, I was once in a conversation, which I think I've mentioned to you before, with somebody who was working at the Arts Council, who suggested that if you don't move to Dublin, you're not taking it seriously. You know, so they had made an analogy about cycling, and when if you were taking cycling seriously, you'd move to France, because that's the at that time that was the center of cycling. So why would you remain in the regions if you really want to take this seriously? And like, that wasn't their company policy, you know, that was that person's opinion, but it's like prevalent in the sphere. So kind of I have sabotaged my career by never moving to Dublin. And like, it's really interesting when talking to Dublin artists saying I'm moving from Cork to Waterford, you see their eyes glaze over and go, oh, not Dublin. You know, like, it doesn't matter that you were in that city and are now moving to a completely different city, because it's just not Dublin. So
I think there's it's really interesting to hear you talk about that, because I think what's really confusing for a lot of artists at a certain point in their life is the unacknowledged relationship they've had to prestige up to that point. So this sense of, oh, well, they're in Dublin and they're paying X amount of money to be in this place, trying really hard to do a thing, and not feeling particularly great around it. And then questioning, well, what am I trying to exactly get at here? And I think it's something to be managed really carefully. And it feels like you've done that. It feels like you've seen the prestige for what it is in that look and separated it away from the actual work that you do and the joy in that. I always get annoyed that, you know, you might do a wonderful play that you've bore your soul in and crippled yourself in the process of making to do. And you might mention it in an audition and someone will say, oh yeah, but where was that? And, you know, your visceral feeling is there was still 200 people there. It was very real for me and for them. And so, yeah, and so the work, and also your point around community arts. Shockingly, I work a lot in community arts, and just the idea that, oh, you might work with theatre with people who don't normally have access to it because of money, and well, I guess that's something good to do in between jobs, right? And yeah, and your experience of it being, yeah, so much more different. Having gone full circle, and it feels like you really have had quite a trajectory of like from living in that single little room in Dublin to the constant traveling to make things work, to sampling the British system and back. From your perspective now, and as an artist currently working, yeah, what would you say it is to live well as a creative in the world today for you?
It's really interesting that COVID, the forced staying in one place has made me question a lot of that. Mm-hmm. So it has made me question what is living well. The moment on the train when I was thinking about what am I doing and why am I doing this? And is it better to make more work in a system in Dublin? You know, like the only way I'll get seen is if people see it, you know, like that's networking 101 is to be like to be at a thing, then people will see you and go, oh yeah, you're a person. Like lots of jobs have come because I've gone for a drink with my friend afterwards and met the other creatives who went, oh, you're somebody I don't know who you are, tell me about yourself. Oh, you work in this area, you've worked with all those people, oh, interesting. And then they might look up the website and then they might offer me a job. Like, you know, that has really happened because it's about just meeting people. So that moment on the train was like, am I a fool to not be just living in Dublin and doing all of that stuff? And what do I really want? And like, you know, nature and watching things grow has been such a solace for me in this time. So what is living well as a creative? I think there's prongs of it for me, and I don't know how many there are. I've just said 3 fingers. So like the art, the making of the art in a team for me is paramount, which is why I think theatre is my métier. So it's having other people working together with you on a goal that you then present to an audience. So that's number one is the gang, and the art of that. So definitely the art, collaboratively made art, I suppose. Mm-hmm. And then number 2 would be the audience, like who is going to see the work? Like theatre is, I think Waterford is a brilliant place because theatre hasn't been only for the rich in Waterford, always. Sprees, Red Kettles, bringing the work to the people in their various housing estates from the inception of it is a very strong guiding force in what I think like art should be. Sprees, making it free on the streets as well. And then I think the musical societies in Waterford, like the Tops of the Town, it's okay to work in a factory and also put on a spangly dress and be in the Tops of the Town, you know, or historically it was. I mean, that's not happening at the moment, but those 3 things I think democratized art in Waterford, certainly the performing arts in Waterford, and meant it wasn't just for university educated middle class people like me, you know, like it wasn't just for those people. And so coming back to Waterford, I have strongly got those desires to bring the theatre to people. Like, so it's about the audience and it's about who those audience are and making them feel welcome. And for me, it's particularly children. And so more and more I'm thinking, God, we really need to be bringing stuff to schools because that's the most democratized way of getting each child access, which Little Red Kettle are obviously doing amazingly and having the best fun, it looks like, doing that. And so it's about the gang and the art and the audience, and then it's about everything else. Like, it's about having space and time to not make my work the only thing that is about me. Like, that's, you know, so the theatre is so part, like theatre and the arts are so part of my identity, that when that got taken away in COVID, like, what are the other things that are my identity builders? And so, like, you know, food, cooking, online Zooming with people, and painting, a thing that I never ever had a chance to do, and have had suddenly, you know, like, trying to do that. And so I don't have great drafts person skills, and so getting to practice that was really lovely. So it was like getting to practice an art form that you kind of I work in pencil sketches and like rough drawings. They're awful to look at, but, you know, and then polishing them up. But so getting time to do that. So what is living well as a creative? So I think it's trying to allow some space for other things in my life as well. And, you know, obviously my partner and friends, and then growing things in the garden. Like, I know, you know, going back to those ideas of watching a garden grow is a really, like, the first show I did was The Secret Garden. So that's always been there as a nugget of things since I was 8 and read that book. But I have really enjoyed that this springtime in those contexts, while being, like, you know, full of stress and fear about this horrible disease that could kill us.
Yeah. I mean, it's from the way in which you look at work, that three-pronged thing, considering the work you want to make, the audience, and the whys around that, as well as just, yeah, that distinguishing that you make around your identity as an artist, and separating that from, well, what are the things that are the other identifiers that I have? Because I think for a lot of artists, at least, or for creatives, it's can be such an overwhelming and struggling thing to do what they are doing, and they attach so much to that idea of prestige and doing it, that it can be hard to really recognize and give time to the other elements, which, yeah, fundamentally need attention, much like your growing garden.
Yeah.
Deirdre, thank you so much. Goodness, I have learned so much from hearing you talk that I didn't know, which is very odd considering we, you know, first met when we were about 15 years of age. So this has been fascinating for me. But thank you very much for your time, Deirdre.
Thank you. It was really interesting for me, and we kind of had talked about what I think that looking back on things become clearer in hindsight. So none of this was a plan, like none of any of this was a plan. So, but talking about it in this way and acknowledging the moments of transition and the decisions that were made or were forced by the circumstances is really interesting to kind of go, oh, I didn't ever have a plan, but that's where this is, that's how we've got to here. So that's really, thank you for that opportunity, which is a funny one in the middle of COVID to go, oh.
It's a nice distinction to make though, because it can sound in hindsight like we reconsider things very differently to how we experience them going forward. So this form of talk is important to, it can look like a very well laid out story when in reality, it's quite an emergent thing, as you said earlier. Deirdre, thank you very much.